Hello everybody, welcome to Crafty Soup. My name is Misty. Once a month I am inspired by existing products in the real world to create my own scrapbooking, supplies, embellishments, and so forth. So as you take a look at some of the inspiration on the screen, I have 3 ideas to share with you today on mimicking these products. So let's dive in. Of the 3 ideas I want to share today, I'm most excited about this one, and it's called infinity stenciling. So I am trying to design these products that are 6x6 stencils that will continue off all of the edges. So you can start your stenciling anywhere you want and continue the pattern. And I'm hoping this will work with pastes as well as all of the other medias that we have. And while I mentioned some of the features that the eventual stencil will have, this is just a prototype, and so I'm working on this idea. I am going to mark my stencil with the word up so that I know how to continue the pattern. I am going to spray the back of the stencil with pixie spray, particularly because these ones are super thin stencil material. That's part of why it's a prototype. I could also use a double-sided adhesive, but I'm going with the pixie spray because it is less fussy, although you'll see in the end it does cause one problem. I have pulled out a selection of my favorite inks, which happen to be Concord and Ninth, and I have a variety of colors in autumnal shades. And then I am just going to start stenciling. I'm starting with one color, and I will fill in a little bit of every single leaf on this stencil. I will go in with a second color and again fill in a little bit of every single leaf. And here's kind of the look at the progress so far. You can see where those edges of the stencil end, and I'm creating a little bit of a haze outward so that when I bump up the next stencil, there's not a harsh line where I've finished stenciling. And then I've done a third color, and here is my fourth darkest, most intense color, and I'm making sure to add just a little. I'm going to wipe away from my paper to clear the stencil so I can start the next layer. Yes, as you're stenciling, some of these colors be left behind, so you can clean off each color layer as you go. I figured I want a little bit of blending anyway, so I'm just cleaning at the end of one stenciling. So again, I line up my stencil with the corner and the edges of my paper. I make sure the shapes of my images are lined up as well, and then I can continue stenciling the next square of my paper. As you can see, I've got a pretty good look going across there. It looks pretty smooth and seamless. I'm going to do the same thing down here in the bottom corner. And again, making sure I line up those edges. And then after the final corner, here is the peel and reveal. And this infinity stencil could keep going forever, but I end with my 12 by 12 edges. Now the pixie spray does leave some contamination of sticky, and I just deal with that with some anti-static powder to remove all the sticky. My next idea is going to start off with the tags that were gridded tags in the inspiration kit, and then I'm going to move beyond that with a technique I learned in a card making class. So I like crossing over the different crafty ideas. I'm going to start my tags with this set of nested tags from scrapbook.com, and this is one of my favorite die sets all around. And then I particularly like these tags because not only do they have a variety of sizes, but they come with different sizes of holes and the reinforcers to build your tags. Now I'm going to use a variety of LDRS creative supplies on these projects because I learned this idea from them. I like to support them by buying some of their products. And you can do this without any of these products, and we'll talk more about that later, but having a variety of words and images in a variety of sizes will be helpful. And then I'm using a color palette that will work with my scrapbooking kit. So the basis of these tags is to create the grid infrastructure. And I'm doing that with a stamp, but as you see in a minute, you don't even need this stamp to do that. And since our inspiration was just plain grids, I will leave some of them as is, but that grid look totally reminded me of these products that I have in my stash in this class that I took from LDRS. So here I am just stamping one more tag. And remember, if you're using stamps for this, you can rotate your stamps to be whatever direction you want, or here I'm double stamping. I rotated my stamp and then I'm double stamping to get even more grid look out of this. So don't be limited by the exact shape of your stamps. Now, if you don't have this kind of stamp, a simple ruler and a fine line pen is all you need. And I use the help of my grid mat behind me to make sure everything is straight when I trace the ruler with my pen, and I will be sure to do it in a couple of different directions to give a little bit more variation and variety to my lines. But really, it's easy peasy. You can just make your own grids, no problem. You don't need a stamp. Now, if you don't have all of these other stamps, you can use stickers. Just know that stickers will tend to cover up some of your grids, so some of the idea of this technique will be a little bit different. And here we are overstamping our grid with a main focal word. You could do focal images, focal words, whatever you want to do to kind of add variety to this process. And here I'm stamping off the ink to get a lighter tone, and I'm trying to add at least 3 places of each color of ink that I'm going to use on a tag in 3 different sizes. So I've got my large word, a medium circle image, and that one I toned down so it's not too bold and bright to distract from the word, but my smallest image is pretty small, so I can leave that one fully inked. Then I'm using a second tone of ink here for some more words, and I just do repeat stamping so that it kind of fades away as we go. And then with a third color of ink, I try to stick with 3s, both in ink colors and in decoration stamping, but I add a little bit more elements to the layout to create just a random kind of grid of elements. And here I am doing another tag, and as you can see, this one is a little bit less random, but it still has multiple layers and images on it in multiple colors to create that collage effect, and that is what I'm going for. I forgot to add my little reinforcer rings on some of the tags earlier, so I will go ahead and do that now. And I like the pop of the dark color against the cream backing. Now here's one where I got a lot of images going on in here, and it's starting to look a little muddy, so I come back in and make sure I have that focal word or image to kind of pull everything together. And I used a nice dark color in a good size font to create that focal so that everything around it kind of supports that. So that is my idea that I am sharing with you that I learned from LBRS Creative to create collaged images using stamps. But remember, you can use stickers or whatever else you have as well. All right, for my last idea, this is nothing complicated, but it might be something you don't think of right away. I'm going to die cut some greenery, these happen to be fern fronds, out of an extra thick multimedia paper, and then I'm going to watercolor on it. A lot of people don't necessarily think about watercoloring on their die cuts, but it is something that makes die cutting a little more flexible because you can just die cut everything out of white and then color them to your heart's content later, whether you use a solid color or if you do like I'm doing here and just do a variety of blends of color. Of course, using colors that blend well together is a good idea, otherwise you end up with muckiness, and for these particular ones it doesn't matter too much because the muckiness would turn brown, and since I'm doing autumnal colors, brown is in that color palette anyway, so I am just going for it. I am making this easy peasy. I wet down my paper first to help the colors blend and flow, and then I am just tapping that wet paint onto the wet paper and not thinking about it at all, just going, trying to making it a little bit random, but just tapping until I'm happy with what the colors look like. And these will dry back lighter, so if you want darker colors, use less water, and you can always add more layers on top to intensify colors. Now for this last one, I had some paint left over on my tray, so instead of using the paintbrush again so that I get more intense color, then watering it down with my paintbrush again, I can go ahead and tap in there. And as you can see, it's still a little bit too light, so I'm just going to add extra color, and that's no big deal. With this technique, you just add in what you need, and I'm going to press it down, and once I'm satisfied with that, I will let all of these dry. So that is the third idea, in case you don't think about using your die cuts in these different ways. All right, that wraps up everything for this time around. I want to thank you for making it all the way to the end of this video. I do appreciate you being here. I know this video is coming out to you a couple days late, but I've been busy, so stay tuned for a project share coming up real soon with all the things I've been busy with. Until then, I hope you have an artful day.